We'll wait for folks to share. And as folks are sharing, we'll go ahead and tell you a little bit more about ProInspire and what we're going to be talking about today with the Here to Listen program. So ProInspire is a nonprofit. Our mission is to activate leaders at all levels to accelerate race equity. We work at the individual level with individual leaders, with organizations and across the system. And our vision is an equitable and just society free of systemic oppression where all people thrive. We have really clarified our focus population of who do we want to be better off because of our work, and that's BIPOC leaders at all levels in the social sector. So that really drives the work that we're doing, and also why we think the Here to Listen program is so important. And welcome, Jamila. Thanks for sharing where you're from. And I know there's some other folks from foundations that we have worked with here, so appreciate people joining. I'll tell you a little bit more about where this came from. And so ProInspire in 2021 published our leadership model for race equity impact. This was really based on 5 years of research we did about how do individual leaders advance racial equity. And what we found is that we have to advance racial equity from self to systems. Well, when we did our exploration, we identified 4 core commitments for individuals to advance racial equity. When leading self, it's exploring identity. So how do we understand our own identities, understand experiences, the privilege we have, also where we've experienced marginalization, and then think about how others' identities might impact the way they come into situations. As it relates to leading people, we talk about centering relationships, and that really is moving away from transactional relationships to transformational relationships. When it's leading organizations, we're looking at how do we align values, and many of our organizations have values stated around equity and what our mission is, but how do we actually align the practices that we have internally with those values? And finally, leading systems, we believe that we have to collectively reimagine, we have to work together, and we know that's a big role that philanthropy plays, is really supporting different stakeholders to collectively reimagine systems to actually get to different outcomes. So the leadership model was really the foundation for Here to Listen. We spent 5 years building that. And then one of the things that we learned as we talked to people that we partner with in philanthropy was specifically thinking about the role of folks in foundations around advancing racial equity. And what we identified is how the people can support racial equity outcomes. So if we commit to exploring identity, then people can show up as their authentic selves. And in foundations, both how do you have that experience as a staff member in a foundation, and also how do you build that relationship with those that you partner with, whether it's grantees or vendors and others. As it comes to leading people, centering relationships, the outcome is improved trust in relationships. And we think that's really core to advancing racial equity. Aligning values, then we start to see alignment between grant making and race equity. So the way that we are doing the work in philanthropy is aligned to race equity. And with collective reimagining, it's actually how our foundation's working with others to disrupt systemic racism. So seeing ourselves part of an ecosystem. And what we did starting in 2021 was partnered with other foundations and philanthropic serving organizations to look at what would really support foundation staff with applying these leadership practices to their day-to-day work. We were part of a cohort with Fund for Shared Insight, and that helped us to better understand the experiences people had in foundations that led us to put together Here to Listen. So we're going to be talking about really how listening and feedback support equitable experiences. And I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Monet to talk more about that.
Thank you so much, Monisha. Again, welcome everyone. We're so glad you are here. And, in addition to all this work that we do at ProInspire, I'm also a yoga teacher, a mindfulness practitioner. So I want you to just for a moment, close your eyes, maybe take a deep breath, and think of someone in your life who is a great listener. Someone in your life who is a great listener. And let the image of that person come to mind. And then I want you to focus on yourself in this moment and think about, how do you know that person is a great listener? How do you know? And give us, how do you know? Put that in the chat for us. I'm curious about this. How do you know that person is a great listener? How do you know? Go ahead and put that in the chat for us. You actually feel heard. Yes, thank you, Kathy. Anybody else? How do you know? They ask questions. Yeah, that show they're listening, reflect back with what you said. Thank you, Jamila. Thank you, Justin. There's a period of reflection after talking. Yes, that pause, right? Sometimes we're a little uncomfortable with that silence, right? Even in this space, right? We had a moment of pause and of silence, that period of reflection. Thank you so much, Justin. And, oftentimes we think that listening is simple, it's basic, but it's really a skill that we can learn. It needs to be embedded, embodied. It's really a practice, not as simple as we might think. And so we assume that people are great listeners, but that's really hard to come by. Most people like to talk and talk. They like to even talk about themselves. Some people listen to respond, listen to relate, right? So if in your personal life, it may be hard to find someone who's a great listener. So just imagine when you have power and resources, even when your intentions are great, sometimes it can be hard to listen. And when we think about philanthropy, we often think about the relationship that philanthropy has with power, right? The relationship that philanthropy has with power. And when we explore that relationship, we realize the importance of active, high quality listening, high quality listening. And so, some of the ways that power may show up in philanthropy is, power to establish grant making areas, create grant making applications, create grant applications, reporting requirements, selecting grantees, approving rapid response investments, sustaining attention on social challenges, shaping narratives around social challenges, building relationships with community members, elevating the voices of those most impacted. And in order to do that, high quality listening is required. So this is why we at ProInspire believe that the practice of high quality listening is so essential to accelerate race equity. So if you go to the next slide for me, I want to talk a little bit more about why listening matters for racial equity. So at ProInspire, if you have downloaded our leadership model, you will see that we have a 3A application. We talk about the 3 A's. And we know that these 3 A's are extremely important to high quality listening. So the first one is active learning and unlearning. So listening builds trust, right? And we believe that constituents, colleagues, partners, et cetera, are experts of their own lives, their own lived experiences, and listening can really lead to better decisions. Our second A is intentional action. Listening helps ensure those most impacted by decisions are active designers, deciders, agents, co-creators, owners of the processes. And then this last A is the processes for accountability. Listening makes space for constituents to define effectiveness, progress, and success for themselves, and shifts from power over to power with. I love that, power instead of power over to power with. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Rosie to talk a little bit more about what is here to listen. Rosie, what is it?
Thank you. Thank you. So
Here to Listen, drum roll, right? It is a program that's designed for foundation staff to explore these leadership practices, the day-to-day leadership practices like listening, and apply a racial equity and power analysis to their listening, feedback, decision-making, and communication styles. Because, as Dr. Monet was sharing earlier, like, listening, it seems basic, it seems simple, but it really is a practice. And so Here to Listen is a program to create space to practice. And it is expressed through our acronym of Honor Lived Experience, Exemplify Equity, Responsive, and Engaged. The here of this acronym is how you practice high quality listening. You do that by honoring a speaker's lived experience, by exemplifying equity in relationship with them, by being responsive to what you're hearing and engaged in that conversation with them. So what does this program actually look like? Well, we have kind of two options for how Here to Listen can be facilitated. There is an open enrollment offering, which is a virtual program that anyone who works in a foundation and has positional authority or situational authority over others can sign up for, can enroll in. And that offering is on November 1st and 2nd from 12 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and it's offered on a sliding scale based on a foundation's grant-making budget. So some more specifics of this open enrollment offering. It is an 8-hour training, and it's delivered over these 2 consecutive days. So it's 4 hours each day, of course, with spacious breaks and spaciousness moments for people to step away and get like a screen break. As I said earlier, it's designed for those who have positional authority over others. And what we mean by that is that this could be someone who is like a people manager internally. It could also be perhaps like a program officer who has this positional authority over grantees. And by enrolling in the open enrollment, you get access to a virtual card deck, which we will show in a moment, and a workbook to, again, really practice our frameworks, work through scenarios and role playing, and have access to this workbook beyond the program itself. And for this offering, we have 20 seats available. So then, in addition to our open enrollment version of Here to Listen, we also are able to customize it. So with a custom program that starts at $35,000, and it really, the variables of the cost there would be if it's facilitated virtual, if it's in person, the number of times that we're facilitating it, and the length of the facilitation. But this program would be an 8-hour training delivered in 1 or 2 days. So it could be like 1 full day or 2 half days. We can do it in person or virtual. And the customized aspect of it is really the audience and customized for your foundation's needs. So it could look like customizing it for a department, a team, for like all of your people managers or all of your program officers or trustees. It can also be a full staff, with the little asterisk there that we do like to keep cohorts around 30 participants because this is a very interactive facilitation. We know that the bigger the group, it's harder to have those open discussions and to like really be engaged in the facilitation. And similar to the open enrollment, in the custom program, folks still get access to our card deck and workbook. We have a virtual version of it and like an actual printed version of it. And so depending on if it's in person or virtual will lead to what version of this card deck and workbook you would have access to. But ultimately, in both options, Here to Listen is offering strategies for how to shift from that kind of passive listening to respond, listening to fix, listening to talk about yourself, into this more intentional, equitable, high quality listening that's going to deepen relationships, and build this practice of healthy and habitual approaches to how we work with each other, to like navigating conflict, communication, and giving and receiving feedback. So to share a little bit more about the theory of change behind this offering, we've talked about why listening is essential to accelerating racial equity. We've talked about the power that philanthropy holds within our sector. To kind of bridge these concepts together is the theory of change behind this program. So we really believe that if foundations are truly committed to centering and being responsive to community voice and needs, that can't only exist in the like external relationship to grantees. Like how could I say that I'm truly listening to those most impacted outside of my organization if internally I'm not even listening to my own team? There's this like dissonance there. And the like basic theory behind this program is like, if I'm not doing it well internally, how can I be doing it well externally? And so Here to Listen takes this self-to-systems lens from our leadership model, and it invites participants to do self-work and to understand and commit to those day-to-day practices that embody racial equity. So for example, like building a capacity to demonstrate self-awareness. Then it invites participants to do that interpersonal work by centering relationships with those they manage or grantees, again, anyone you have situational power over, and develop these skills that build trust and also deepen your power and racial equity analysis. And that practice then surfaces the organizational work, because if you have this power and racial equity analysis, it's inevitably going to lead to establishing more congruency between racial equity and your foundation's organizational policy and practices, because you're going to notice where they're not in congruency right now. And all of that then ultimately builds through these ripple effects, that if folks are listening, if their foundation internal cultures are rooted in racial equity, then there will be these power shifts and lasting change within foundations and the sector. And particularly because foundations are so influential in their impact at their sector level, we really believe and really see how Here to Listen can have impact from that self to systems. So that in its essence is our theory of change. It is this self to systems approach for how really practicing high quality listening and deepening that racial equity and power analysis does have the system impact that we're looking for. So the way that this actually like shows up in our facilitation and content is through these different learning modules. And these are like the high level themes that are in both open enrollment and the custom program. Although with custom program, we may take like different approaches kind of depending on your foundation's needs, but thematically, this is still what we would be talking about. So at a high level, our objective is that participants understand first why effective listening is essential to equitable experience in workplace and in the work. And then our next objective is that participants actually develop these high quality listening skills as a way to shift power. And so the way this shows up in our learning modules follows the HERE acronym. So it's first honor lived experience, and that's exploring aspects of identity. So identity is really the theme that we work with in the honor lived experience module, and how your identity is influenced and shapes your communication, your trust, decision-making, and listening skills or preferences. Then there's exemplify equity, And so the themes or modules in that are trust and power. And so that's identifying ways for how you can center relationships that build trust and also shift power. And then there's the responsive and engaged module. And that's really where we're taking the theory and putting it in practice. It's the practical hands-on aspect of the training, because we're actually practicing listening. We're giving and receiving feedback, and particularly as a tool to navigate challenging conversations. We have this whole framework and worksheet that folks can work through, that to practice how they would give feedback during challenging situations. There's storytelling. We do scenarios in the custom version of this. We would work with the foundation's planning team to come up with scenarios that are actual real hot scenarios within your foundation. And we do role playing. And then, as I said before, the access to the workbook, the worksheets, the practical tools, the card deck are all helping the folks in the program to actually be responsive and engage and embody this high quality listening practice. And so I've mentioned the card deck many times, and we're actually going to show it to you now. I will pass it to you, Dr. Monet.
Oh, thank you so much, Rosie. I just love these cards, and they are so colorful and so beautiful. So with this program, you get a tool to use. And this is the card deck. Uh-oh, you can't see it because of my, oh, there you can see, right? These are my cards that I just love. And the card deck really includes mindsets, skills, behaviors that you can practice to accelerate racial equity and demonstrate high quality listening all the way from self to systems. And my team doesn't know this, but I've been using these even in my personal life. Like, for example, this one is on self. And it says, developing emotional awareness to disrupt bias, mindfully noticing my emotions when I'm listening so I can respond without bias. And then on the back of the cards, they have I statements, which are so powerful to help I am aware of my triggers and tune into my body and emotions when I notice them. So that's just an example. There's stop, think, and discuss on the cards. So participants get access to our physical cards when we offer the training in person, or if you do open enrollment with us in November, you will get the virtual deck. And it really gives you a chance to reflect and really discuss. So
Monet,
now I'm going to turn.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for a moment and actually share the virtual cards, because we have
sneak peek.
Sneak peek. Okay. We'll say we're still, that final development stage where you're cleaning up all the bugs, but so exclusive here. Here's the virtual version of these cards. So they're organized by our self to system. We have them organized also through the 3 A's. So you can click around and see okay, I want to look at a people card, and I want it to be, I don't know if this will load, and intentional action. And then I can pull up and click on it and see the I statement and the stop, think, and discuss, and the practice with the definition. So this is what folks in our open enrollment would gain access to, or if you were doing a custom version that's virtual. And then, as Monet showed you just a moment ago, we also have an actual printed version.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rosie. So I'm gonna hand it over to you, Monisha.
Great. Rosie, actually, can you pull up real quick we can walk through a couple of the sample cards so people can see these. Dr. Monet already mentioned the one around really reflecting on biases. and centering lived experience. So as we think about listening, really how that connects to trust and connection. And we spend time on understanding our own lived experiences, but also how do we center that as it relates to our relationships. For organizations, one of the example cards, we can go to the next one, is feedback loop. So how are we actually evaluating the impact, the racial equity impact of our work? And this is a prompt that, we talk about on our leadership team at ProInspire, like what are the feedback loops that we're using? And so this is a way to have that conversation. And then as it relates to systems, how do we understand how the interlocking inequities work together and our role in the system? And this is thinking specifically about conversations around what's the history of our foundation's wealth, and what is the role that we have to divest from how that wealth has perpetuated oppression. So those are some of the examples of cards that we use in the training program, and even beyond. I think the training, so much of it is actually interactive, where you're practicing things. So this, in some ways, is more of a tool for after to be able to keep coming back to the practices. So to tell you a little bit more about what it can look like in action. This is a sample for how we have facilitated the program for people managers. We did this recently with a large foundation that had around, I think, 70 people managers. So we did 2 different cohorts, as Rosie mentioned. We like to have the group size be around 30 so that you can have meaningful conversation and participation. And the first half day was focused on the H&E, honoring lived experience and exemplifying equity. And as Rosie mentioned earlier, some of the consistent aspects are exploring identity and how that shapes lived experiences. And then also understanding why racial equity and high quality listening and feedback are important to our work. So we really want to make sure we're all collectively aligned around that. Then how do we have self-awareness and with high quality listening and storytelling, and practicing that in ways that we can build trust and address power dynamics? Day 2 focuses a lot on, in people management, how do we hold ourselves accountable through responsive and engaged communication? So how are we going to commit to this? We actually practice giving and receiving feedback as a tool to navigate conflict. So we use a framework and really work through a conflict that we need to manage, and how we would have that conversation. And then in some cases, we're looking at, what are some of the org values we have that support racial equitable management? And then personally, what are the actions that we can take to hold ourselves accountable as people managers? So that's an example of how, as Rosie mentioned, we can do this for different groups, but with people managers, how it's really tailored to the role they have around managing others. And then some of the other things that we have done, we've done some speaking engagements and webinars. I know some folks here joined us at CHIO and Grantmakers in Health. And we also are exploring, for some foundations that just want to have a deep dive on one of the areas, doing that. So we're really happy to talk around how we could support you, because we think these practices are ones that we want to really be embedded. And so finding ways to partner with what you're trying to do. So as far as next step, I guess we'll pause and see questions that folks may have. So if you have questions, feel free to, yeah.
You say the same thing. You can put it in the chat, you can unmute, like whatever, works for you.
Yes. All right, as folks are thinking about their questions, Rosie, can we share about how to stay engaged? Yes, so just want to invite you, one, we are opening up the first open enrollment we'll have in November. So hopefully if you're interested, sign up for that. It's a great way to get the experience for yourself. And if you're thinking about wanting to do this at your foundation, you can reach out to Rosie and email her to talk about it. We have the space to do 2 more sessions with foundations this year. And so, or if you're planning for next year, would be happy to talk through that. See, any other questions? Great, thanks, Valerie and Kathy. Well, we will stay on if anyone has questions, but thank you all for joining us. I'm glad to see there's interest in Here to Listen, and hope that you join for one of these programs, or we'll see you at one of our upcoming sessions.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Nice, great job. Should we stop recording?